Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 25. We've made 25, Taylor. Rugby League Coach Podcast. What's that bridge behind you? The Humber Bridge in Hull?
Mate, this is the bridge in Redcliffe. This is the famous bridge, the Horny Brook, the home of the Fins.
They've been burning bridges, Redcliffe. Never mind building them with all the players they've been trying to poach. We've got James Varley all the way from the mother country, and somebody else from the mother country, which I'll introduce in a second. But James, you're not on the bus today.
I'm not. No, I've got a day off today, Lee. Start 6 days off work, so I'll relax.
Fiji's biggest fan, Raneel Kumar. How have you been, and what have you been up to?
Good, Lee. Not much, just trying to stay on the right side of the law.
You're always in the same place each week, Raneel. I don't think you move. And but how last and very much not least, rugby league royalty in England, media guru. That's enough about me. When I'm talking about Phil Caplan, how are you?
I'm all right. I'm suffering withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah, well, luckily for you and me, there's three of us now who are English, and you've got James just up the road from you in Keighley, and he will give you a geographical report at any point and a weather report at any point because he just drives buses around. So you've got some support here. Without me asking you a question, Phil, tell me about your World Cup.
I think, however you look at it, for those of us that have been involved in rugby league for, all our lives and become cynical because it's in our DNA, the rugby league was a refresher, reminding us why we love the sport in the first place. 3 tournaments together was inspired. The final picture with all 3 winners lifting the tournament at Old Trafford was wonderful and exactly what the competition was about. I think in the men's, we had 2 tournaments. We had the one where we could tell all the stories at the beginning, the likes of Lebanon and Jamaica, Greece, all fantastic stories. The second half of the tournament was when quality kicked in terms of the games. And
agreed.
There's some unforgettable images, not least the simultaneous Civitao and Sipitao at the quarter-final. I think the women's game didn't teach us anything other than the fact that we were privileged to see some of the highest quality women's rugby league we'd ever seen in our back garden. And clearly the right team won because they had the best preparation and are so far advanced in where they are in their domestic competition. I thought Brazil in the women's competition was the story. Again, the enthusiasm and joy that they brought and a whole new continent as well was just so uplifting. And arguably one of the best games of the whole tournament, irrespective of quality and standard, was Brazil against Canada, which was just astonishing. But the real success, the round the water cooler moment that rugby league cannot gain, particularly over here, was wheelchair rugby league. Absolutely outstanding, bringing in a whole new market, a completely new audience, people talking about it who wouldn't normally come across rugby league. Doesn't have the same historical baggage attached to it, particularly geographically. So there's absolutely no reason why we genuinely can't look at this as a template for new broadcast deals, new markets, new commercial sponsors. I think the final of that, which was everything we hoped it would be and actually did turn out to be the best of the 3 finals, was exceptional. We walked into Manchester Central and 5 years ago, wheelchair rugby league was being played in front of 50 people in an unmarked sports hall, and here were almost 5,000 generating the most ridiculous atmosphere. For a World Cup final that had everything, including some genuine animosity between the nations contesting it, which is exactly what you want to sell it.
And the French touch judge, or whatever you call them in that version of the sport.
All brilliant, all eminently reportable. And I think the thing about that as well is that there's great stories attached to it. When was the last time that BBC Two stayed on air for an extra half an hour to cover an England team winning a World Cup final and do all the presentations and the interviews, and also got an audience of 1.2 million for that? And that was wheelchair. It wasn't the running game. Something has changed in rugby league because of this World Cup. Now, whether we can capitalise on that is a question we've been asking since 1954 when we had the first one. But all in all, I just thought it was a fantastic experience. All 61 games on the BBC was massive over here. Really big audiences, which again, countered the fact that some people said, there's empty stadiums. Well, you had the chance to, for the first time ever, watch every game from the comfort of your own home. If you add those two together, some logistical issues there always are, but for me, a complete and utter success.
Very fair assessment, and I think there's a few angles you can go in at any World Cup. you can go in from the attendance's angle, you can go in from the eyeballs, you can go in from the choice of stadia or whatnot. But while you're here, Phil, I want to make the best of you because I know we've only got you for a half an hour-ish. That makes you sound like a right diva, doesn't it? But you've got a prior meeting. So I'll zoom in straight away on the question I want to, but Taylor, Raneel and James, while we're talking, please just fire questions at Phil while we've got him. But I know that if it was just me and Phil on this podcast, we could fill 3 hours on this subject. Mate, in my whole lifetime, England or Great Britain haven't won a World Cup. They've not won the Ashes. In the last 20 years, I believe we have seen the almost catastrophic disintegration in level of performance of Wales, Ireland and Scotland. Some statistics in and around that. Wales, Ireland and Scotland haven't won a knockout game since the year 2000. That was Wales in the semi-final, getting to the semi-final. And in the last 2 World Cups, they've not beaten one Southern Hemisphere rugby league side. What the hell is going on?
Well, if you want to take Wales specifically, one of the reasons they have never kicked on is clearly we don't have access to best rugby union talent anymore. You look at the team that played in the 1995 semi-final and then back that up by playing in the 2000 semi-final.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of those games took Australia all the way. Partly because those teams were full of the richest rugby union talent because we were a game that was awash with money and could afford to go out and buy it. When rugby union went professional in 95, that source of a player stops. That's one thing that is specific to Wales. Whenever they've been successful at rugby union, they've had the ability to go and sign at rugby league. They've had the ability to sign the best rugby union talent, and that isn't going to happen anymore. Now, whether we've addressed that is another issue. Ireland and Scotland have always been development nations. Started off in the Emerging Nations World Cup and have made it now to obviously the main tournament. The issue that they've got is they don't have at the moment domestic competition that is any different to what people are trying to do in places like Serbia, Greece, Italy, Jamaica. So they haven't progressed from that point of view. They haven't expanded the reservoir and pool of talent that they have access to. Their best players in this World Cup, again, were heritage-based players. And one of the other things we learned from this World Cup, to go slightly off topic, is we shouldn't make that distinction anymore between heritage and players that are born in a country. It means as much to both of them. If you saw the people that cried when the national anthems were played, if you got the privilege to interview people like Luke Keary, it meant as much to him to play for Ireland as it would have done to pull on an Australia shirt. So I don't want to make that distinction that the heritage players are the only things that keep them going. But clearly in those nations, a heritage player is far more important than a domestically produced player in terms of rugby league ability and nous. And again, the longer you go relying on heritage people, the less heritage people there are. So you have to have some roots. So this then plugs into the domestic game. But the only way the international game can be successful is if the domestic game in the Northern Hemisphere is strong. And it hasn't been over the last 20 years. If you look at Super League in the first maybe 10 years that it came in, 1996 to 2005, big crowds, a lot of sponsorship money, attracted some of the best players from the NRL. Doesn't do any of that anymore. Doesn't have the finance to do that. The world has changed. North of England has changed. The game hasn't changed. We've had interest in Ireland and Scotland domestically, but we've never done anything to promote that as a possibility, as a genuine pathway that, for example, the PNG Hunters have got. And I use them as an example because in this World Cup, I think we saw the strongest PNG team we've ever seen. Arguably, virtually every player in that team was a semi-professional, professional standard, which we've never seen before. That's partly down to the Hunters in the QRL. What we should have done with Wales, we had Celtic Crusaders for a short time in Super League. What we should have done, what we should be doing with Ireland and investigating whether there's a possibility in Scotland, because rugby, both league and union, is really struggling in Scotland, is whether there is a way of creating a domestic scenario that will improve the international game. And if that means saying to people in Ireland, you can have an all-Ireland team playing in a semi-professional competition, whether it's England will take on the Ireland team in Dublin in the autumn of 2023, because I think that would get 10 to 15,000 people if it's the Ireland team that we just saw in the World Cup. That's the kind of thing. You look at France, which again, I'm hopeful that there is a slight upward curve in France at the moment and an improvement that will take them into the 2025 World Cup that they hope. But what did we do? We destroyed the chance of Toulouse being in Super League after one season. Again, that French team on paper was the strongest we've seen probably since the 1950s when they came to Australia and won a Test series. And that's because every single player in that French squad was fully professional, because they were either playing for Catalan or Toulouse or maybe Salford. But everyone in it was at a higher standard. And whilst they didn't make the quarters, they had Trent Robinson in their corner. They know which direction they're going in. But what did we do as a domestic game? We pulled the rug from underneath that. So the long answer to your short question is we are asking exactly the same questions as we did after the 2017 World Cup. I can remember an interview with John Keir after Wales had lost their last group game in Perth, saying, I'm really, really concerned about the state of rugby league in the Northern Hemisphere, about how we're going to bridge that gap and what we're going to do to make sure we are more competitive when it comes around. It's just been around and we're not more competitive. So what did we do? Nothing.
I think John Keir said something before this World Cup vis-a-vis it might be some kind of judgment day for Northern Hemisphere Rugby League too. There's a couple of branches off what you said there, mate. I'll leave the big fish for the end, the England team. But you did talk about the strength of the French side and the fact that they're all professional. And of course, the French side have had Catalan Dragons in Super League for the best part of 2 decades or a decade and a half, something like that. So how much is all this a reflection on the British or European rugby league pathway and the standard of Super League?
It's an absolute reflection of it.
Yeah.
That we play too many games domestically. We don't prioritise the international game. We don't take our international window seriously enough. And unfortunately, there is a lack of money in the sport in this part of the world, which is clearly what you need to be able to recompense the players for playing international rugby, for taking a couple of rounds out of your domestic competition to focus on international rugby. That's a monetary thing. And obviously, COVID and the economic situation in the north of England has hit pretty hard around here. And that's more important for the domestic game to recover from than necessarily making the adjustments that they need to do in the domestic calendar to put the international game at the priority. The other thing is our domestic season is and always has been far too long, because as well as the regular season competition, we have a cup competition, which is valid in its own right and has a history and a tradition and behind it. But to have both of them, you need to pull back from loop fixtures, from magic weekends, and play a domestic competition that has an element of scarcity attached to it. Perhaps one of the reasons money doesn't come into the sport in the manner in which it should. And again, I would exclude wheelchair from this, because I think we've now got another product that we can sell that is quite clearly rugby league, but actually isn't attached to the way we consistently run the sport. But let's assume we're just talking about the running game at the moment. A sport that calls itself a summer sport and wants to market itself in that environment and looks for sponsorship in that area, but starts effectively friendlies in January and plays its last game in October, has lost its identity in the sporting environment here. So I think, again, the good thing to come out of all this, and why all I'm stating is where we are and not using it as a negative to beat the game, because sometimes you have to respond to the economic conditions that you're faced with, is that IMG, who've taken a stake in the sport, are beginning to recognise this. This is the last year, 2023, of straightforward promotion relegation. Again, that is something that doesn't help the sport compete at international level when you've got relegation, because clubs will not invest in youth. They can only buy players to stop them from dropping out of the top flight. And again, that's not development in any sense of the word. No. I think the other thing about IMG is that they're dropping loop fixtures. They're establishing and enshrining an international weekend mid-season, even though you're not having it in the Southern Hemisphere. And to do that, they know that we've got to have a stronger France. We've got to have Ireland, Scotland and Wales that are viable if they're going to do that. I think they're also have been in contact with the NRL about re-establishing the World Club Challenge, which is, again, a stepping stone into the international game. So I think there is hope But the annoying and frustrating thing, which you mentioned right at the very beginning, is for 20 years, the Northern Hemisphere has been stagnant. The other thing that's interesting about the Northern Hemisphere, and I keep going back to wheelchair, and I make no apologies for that because I do think this is a potential saviour in the short term, is that it's exact reverse in wheelchair. That Australia were the only nation over here. They did well to make the semi-finals. They've nobody to play against outside of World Cups. They need to help develop the wheelchair game in the Southern Hemisphere in the same way that IMG need to help us develop the game in the Northern Hemisphere, and arguably the NRL do as well, which is a chat we've had before. That we only have 2 fully professional leagues in the world, and they should be working together rather than against each other. The state of origin, which is a fantastic commodity, one of which goes on the road of the 3. In 5 years' time, we should already be saying that game is coming to London, and Rugby League and the NRL here. We should be trading off the back of each other because that will be a sellout. Stick that in London, and Rugby League will get amazing high-profile publicity and commercial support if we know that's happening. So all things like that, I think, are doable. I think it's an advantage that the next World Cup is also in the Northern Hemisphere in France. I think that gives us a chance to take a really keen eye onto what we're doing here and what we're missing here. But where we are at the moment is where we've been probably since 2003, which is sadly 20 years ago.
Now, the peak team of all this, the one team that could have saved us, the one that we could be sat here saying that we've finally seen something happen after so long, England, didn't even make the final. When you isolate this World Cup, it doesn't seem like too bad a World Cup. I mean, they've had a real good crack. I thought they were excellent for most of the first 3 group games and the Papua New Guinea semi-final, quarter-final, but they dropped the lollies against Samoa. So in isolation, you probably can't criticise the players or the coach too much. However, you look at the England scenario, that's another World Cup final they failed to make. It's 4 or 5 years since Wayne Bennett coached them to an almost to win the competition, never mind just getting to the final. Prior to that, it was 1995. Phil, you've been on this earth a little bit longer than me, I think.
It's grey hair.
How do you feel about the fact that for half a century, Great Britain or Australia haven't beaten Australia in an Ashes series? So in a 2-horse race, 3 matches every 2.5 years, 2 years for a long time, we couldn't do it once. We couldn't win 2 once. And then throw in the World Cup, the last time Great Britain or England won that was 1972. I guess what I'm asking for now, mate, isn't as much your analysis, but your actual emotion around that as somebody who's been in rugby league since the womb, I assume.
Yeah, third generation follower. So my grandfather was watching it in the 1930s. So I think you could say it's probably ingrained. Mixed emotions. I mean, I went to Headingley for the Australia-Fiji game, their first game in this World Cup. Really excited. That green and gold shirt is just so resonant over here, always has been.
Yeah.
And I realised as I sat down that that's the first time Australia have played at Headingley, arguably, and I am biased, the single most important and iconic rugby league ground from the start of the sport to where we are now, in the history of the sport. First time the Australians had been there since 1994.
Wow.
So the brand itself doesn't have as much resonance as it should. And that's partly down to the Australians because they don't come enough. We still don't know when the next Kangaroo tour is.
No.
I know there was one arranged for during the time of COVID and nobody could have, anticipated that the impact that would have had. And there is still talk that there will be one in 2024, which is far too long. The fact that England don't play Australia on a regular basis is one of the problems with international sports. You always need to aim higher, don't you? You need to play nations as often as possible who are better than you are to improve your standard. Well, we don't play nations who are better than us often enough. No. And again, that was proven in the semi-final, that when it came to golden point extra time, which you would have thought that England carried the necessary psychological advantage, having pulled the game back that they arguably should have lost to go into golden point extra time, that they would have been able to finish that game off. But that was probably the worst 8 minutes I've ever seen a team play golden point extra time because they're not put in that situation enough. in their domestic competition. One of the reasons state of origin is so important is because we haven't been competitive enough at international level for 50 years. So why wouldn't you try and find a product that gives your players the best that they can be on a regular enough basis? Because we can't bridge that gap with internationals anymore. Part of it is the international calendar and the lack of it. And obviously the greater state of origin became in importance and more than anything finance, the less internationals meant to people on your side of the world. That needs to change. But we also need to come up with a domestic competition that prepares our players to play at the highest level week in, week out, so that when they do play at international level, they're competitive. And I think that probably upsets me more than anything else, that we know we haven't got that, but we don't do anything about it. And maybe we did have it in 1995. Maybe we did have it in a little bit in 2000, although we were absolutely appalling in the semi-final that year. Maybe we did have it in 2003 when David Waite was in charge. Maybe Wayne Bennett had it in the teams that he looked after, excluding the Great Britain debacle, which was just handled badly by everybody. But as you say, getting to within, 20 minutes of winning a World Cup final in Brisbane, that's as good as it's got in the last few years. And we dispensed with all of that. And I think you can throw a little bit of criticism at the current England men's team. I also think you're right that the minimum requirement for them in a home World Cup was to make the final. But there wasn't enough variety in the team in the semi-final. No. And whilst it was working in the group games and the quarter-final, you couldn't really criticise the coach. But I don't know any team at the moment that is playing with one hooker. And that one hooker is 34 years old. And that when that one hooker is out of gas, you put somebody back into that role who's already made 30 tackles in a different position.
Yeah.
There was, that is something that you can criticise, the over-conservative nature of the way England's men, and to a lesser extent the women, played their games. They went with what they knew. They didn't go with something that could change the result. And I'm going to apologise again for going back to wheelchair, but the reason England won the wheelchair World Cup final was because they had Jack Brown and Nathan Collins on the bench, two very different players that play a very different style of wheelchair rugby league, that are very quick, that when the game was tight, they brought it on, they fashioned a try that turned that game. And the way that England played that wheelchair final was exactly what the men and women didn't do.
Mate, I've spoken to you on podcasts quite a lot now over the last few years, and I don't think I've ever felt as much passion come through the screen from you as you have this time. And I guess my assessment of it, of your conversation, and when you've gone, we're going to talk about all the things that you brought up. I think it's about time something changes, and I think it's in your voice too, mate. I'm just looking at the time, and I know you have to go. Well, thank you again. Can we call upon you in a few weeks or months? And
anytime.
No worries,
honestly.
mate. What we're going to do when you go off, we're going to chat about everything you said. So,
absolutely,
love to the family, and thanks for joining us, mate, for this.
My pleasure.
30 minutes.
Glad I could set the agenda. Hopefully, if you come up with any answers, if you could email me, I'd be very, very grateful.
Take care, lad.
And you. Love
Thanks,
to all.
Phil.
Thanks, Phil.
Right, thank you.
Taylor, I'll start with you, mate. First of all, boys, thank you for being so quiet and patient during that slot.
It was tough, Lee. Yeah,
but, tough being silent. Or
yeah, tough being silent. I made a load of notes about.
Go on, you start.
Yeah, well, first one I thought, how much when rugby league was strong in the early 2000s, how much money did English rugby league put into Ireland, Scotland and Wales in grassroots to try and get young players playing, to try and get a higher profile and strike while the iron was hot. So
my point, Taylor, to that is that once the rugby union players weren't available anymore, you've got to pivot. You've got to think about something else, and you've got to get into the schools, and you've got to put in some long-term plans. You've got to play the long game, Taylor.
Well, I'll tell you what, Lee, you're absolutely right about getting into schools. My son Max, as you know, he's in prep. He's come home from school in the last couple of weeks with a tennis racket. A local tennis organisation went around, gave all the kids in prep a small tennis racket, big enough for him to play with, and all he's been talking about since at home is tennis. He wants to play tennis. I wonder, as you say, James, that exactly where they should have gone, pivoted into the schools, attacked the youth. That's where it's going to bleed through to the parents. You know what I mean? And that's exactly right. While I've got the mic, I just want to thank Phil. Obviously, didn't get a chance to talk there, but you're right, Lee. When you get someone like Phil and you got him on a timeline, you just ask him the right questions and watch him go. And it was just, how good was it just to see him talk so passionately, as you said, and really rip into those topics, throughout, Wales, Ireland, and of course the big one in England. One thing that really I'd never thought about, and I guess I'd never thought about it because I hadn't really looked at the English problem as deeply as a man like Phil would, is how the Super League, being a relegation and promotion system, how that really affects the way that clubs recruit and the way that they treat their own players. Because he's 100% right. It is cutthroat, and if you're looking to keep your team alive, to keep your chances alive, you have to go for the best. You can't. If you're in the middle of the table or towards the end, you can't get a kid and invest in him and say he's going to be our half in 2 years. Let's really invest in and get some skill and teach him how we want to play. Because in 2 years' time, you might not have the money to retain him because you have, you know what I mean? You're not even in the competition anymore. You know what? It's all over.
There's, if you drill down somewhat on the Aussie Schoolboys versus England Academy that used to take place every couple of years, prior to COVID. Basically, if you look at each Australian under 18s versus England Academy 19s or 18s, whatever it is, and see where they've gone to in the next 5 years, more often than not, there's 2/3 of the Australian team playing in the NRL, and there's about 1/3 of the English team playing in the Super League 5 years later. So there's obviously a problem with the pathway. James, can I go to your second point that you talk? Because you're furiously writing notes for those who could watch on YouTube. He was furiously scoring points, I think, while Phil was talking.
I think the thing is, Phil, about about promotion and relegation. Well, it's in the British culture, but it happens in football. But football is far more cash rich. So,
Raneel, you're a Australian-based Fijian.
Yeah.
Can you believe that in Britain we have promotion and relegation in sport?
Yeah. Do you think that is because they mimic sort of what soccer is over there in England? Is that why?
I think it's more a British culture thing.
That's
so. I mean, without going into a history lesson, there's always been more clubs in English sport. So, for example, there is 92 league teams in English football, right? So they split it into 4 divisions. Rugby league has 30 professional clubs. Whereas you could argue in Australia, originally there was about 18, 20-ish kind of thing. And at different times it's been gone down to 16, 14, whatever. And the other thing is, Britain is actually quite a small island. So if you do get promoted, you can actually comfortably get to most grounds in the country if you need to. And I do wonder, Raneel, if Australia just basically being a continent, whenever these things were set up, if you've got a franchise in Perth and you want to be in the NRL one day, well, to try and go through the lower divisions and get yourself promoted to the NRL or the Winfield Cup or whatever it might have been back in the day, it would have cost thousands and thousands of dollars in time to do that.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. So that's probably why. I also think, Taylor, that in Australia, there was quite an Anglo influence, and I think very British early on for obvious reasons. But I think for the majority of this last century that we've just come out of, been a very big American sort of feel to things. To the fact that it sort of changed some of the spellings. So one word that springs to mind is colour, the word colour, that can often be written here without a U. Do you think American sport has had an influence on Australian sport? Because there's no promotion relegation there either.
Yeah, there's no promotion relegation there, and they do have the conference system, and that seems to be something you hear about every 4th or so week, is that they're trying to talk about conferences here in Australia and if it could work, having the northern and the southern conferences and then combining. I think you could be right, Lee. I think you could be right. There is that sort of American influence. One thing for sure, though, is that I don't think there's a step backwards now for the English game. I don't think there's a chance that you could say, right, we're gonna scrap promotion, we're going to scrap relegation, we're going to keep the same amount of teams. I don't think that's going to happen anymore, because you'll have teams running around, of course, in the championship level now that have had rich histories in Super League, and they're still fighting to get back. How do you tell those teams, no, because this year you weren't in the Super League, you're now gone forever? You know, it would be very hard to make that.
I think this IMG that Phil mentioned a fair bit, that has signed an agreement with English Rugby League for 12 years to sort it out, basically. They're basically putting a franchise system in place so that there's criteria that each team has to meet. So if you finish bottom of the ladder in Super League, you might not necessarily get relegated, basically.
Yes. Okay.
So to answer your question about that, how do you say it? Well, the way you say it is you get in an external group at great cost to do an independent thing and say it that way.
You know, get a business analyst to come in and say, look, sorry, you don't meet this criteria. That's fair enough too. But yeah, what you're saying there is, if you do have that spread at the moment, you have that spread and everyone's vying almost in the same sort of push to get into that top competition.
Yeah.
If they did streamline it, get rid of relegation and promotion, you could have a good partnerships within clubs and get a pathway to the top that you don't have at the moment. You know, at the moment, I can send my son down to under sixes at Redcliffe, and it's one of the most unique places in the world.
With his tennis bat.
He could go down there and he could train at the same fields for the next 20 years and end up playing NRL. That could happen. Yeah. That's one, you know, in Australia, there's so many places where you can go somewhere and within 5 kilometers of where you first started football, you could be playing NRL.
That's right.
You know, in the UK, it's a lot different because there's a lot of movement around. You're pushing and moving and you're going sideways, and it's not as easy to follow, and that means the path is not as easy.
Well, we had Phil very passionate for the first 30 minutes, and now it's become the James Varley show, if you don't mind, Taylor. So I'm bringing the structure that I do to these things. You know, the fans have been writing to me saying, Lee, when can you bring structure to these podcasts? Well, here I am pulling it off right now. Taylor, you know, just random.
I'm on holidays. I'm in San Francisco, baby.
What was the next things on your notes, James? Because, you know, being an Englishman, I could see, for those who are watching on YouTube, they could probably see your eyes rolling and the steam coming out your ears when Phil was talking.
I think they could. It's like we've talked about before. The domestic game was strongest in Super League in the first 10 years, probably maybe in 2003, because there were some very strong teams in 2003. Bradford, of course, won the treble, but Leeds were a strong team.
No wonder you're going on about that. Yeah. So if this was a court of law, that somebody would be asking for it to be thrown out because of the prejudice that you bring into that point.
I think in Sustained. A little way, this is just a little way with that. I think the demise of Bradford has mirrored the demise of Super League in a way, because they started going downhill from 2006.
Again, I'm going to ask the jury to consider that the prosecutor here is. You're right, though. It does mirror it. You are right.
It does, but with a few points. Sorry.
The Premier League hasn't slumped because Manchester United have. So you know, it's
strong.
That possibly could just be a coincidence.
Look at the smile on your face when you say that. The Manchester United have slumped. Did you see that? As soon as he said that,
the city.
I do think it's a very good idea of putting State of Origin in London. That really is a good idea.
How would you feel about that, Raneel?
Yes, let's do it. Why not? You know.
Would you get out your tent to watch
that?
In
London.
You love camping. Would you get out your tent to watch that in the middle of the night?
Yeah, I'll take James out.
How would you feel? You're a New South Welshman,
mate,
born and bred. How would you feel about that?
I think one thing that really stood out with what Phil said is how, you know, standoffish, I guess, Australian Rugby League has been. You know, he's talking about when was the last Kangaroos tour, when's the next Kangaroos tour, all that sort of stuff. Even the schoolboy stuff. When are the schoolboys going over there next, you know? And one thing that stood out is, you know, obviously the game here is flourishing compared to the Super League. So why, you know what I mean? Why aren't we doing a bit more? And if there needs to be a sort of a pump up before the next World Cup, a refresher, you know, so the people know how big it is and they get that refresher. State of Origin game in London is an outstanding idea. That would be, you know, bringing all sorts of revenue for the game. It would be great for English fans to see. You'd for sure pack a stadium. You'd love to see it at the biggest stadium you've got and just absolutely pack it out.
There's a massive Anzac population in London as well. There's loads of Kiwis and Australians. So it's a really good.
The atmosphere of the English singing and chanting and
correct.
Different to our sort of style.
There's only one James Tedesco.
I'd love it. And you know what? When have we done something like that? We're talking about going to America. We're talking about going to these places that have a far less thirst for rugby league than the UK does. Instead of this massive look at expansion, why don't we take a little bit of what Phil and the boots on the ground are saying, solidify where we have, solidify what we've got and the paths that we have, protect our own backyard before we end up trying to expand too far with not enough money to do so.
That has been the problem with British Rugby League. It's tried to expand too far, but not put the proper investment into it. That's what I believe. We're in with the Celtic Crusaders, like Phil said, that lasted 2 years in Super League, and they've just kept doing that. Going back to the Australian tours, I do think it helped with that though. When they could play all the club sides, when the English League was played in winter and the Australian League in summer, because it fitted in that you could have a tour for weeks over here, whereas they're both playing at the same time now. So that, because I remember the Great Britain tour of Australia in 1992, Lee, if you remember it, was very high profile. Where
we won the second test, test in Melbourne with a whole Wigan pack.
Yeah, that game.
And Sean Edwards in the half.
Yeah, and Stedman played well at fullback. I remember.
Yeah, and Eastwood kicked the goals, and he was doing his dance type thing before he kicked it. Yeah, it's all etched in my memory, mate. Yes, I mean, we've pontificated now about the Brits and the French for 45 minutes, Taylor, but on the right of my screen here, we've got Taylor and Raneel with their Aussie accents. I guess we have got to give a little bit of time to these Aussies, mate, to brag about winning the Girls' World Cup and the Men's World Cup. Taylor, I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, I've got some breaking news for everyone here on the podcast, on the show. I got a text from my mother yesterday, and she's done a DNA test. That's what she's done. And she's come back and sent me the results. 38% England and Northwestern Europe, specifically in the southeast of England.
Wow.
30% Scottish, 27% Irish.
So you're about 2% Australian, is that what you're saying?
I'm in particular, I'm from Munster in Ireland. And then it says West Cork as well.
Yeah, okay.
3% Swedish and only 2% Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So, I mean, just having a quick look here, what's that? 57 guys. I think it's coming home. I think I'm
the only real Australian here.
I'm going to get an English flag, and I'm going for the Poms in the Soccer World Cup. It's on. It's coming home.
Did you watch the World Cup final, Taylor?
I did. I didn't watch it at the time because I'd come home from a wedding and I'd had a few too many sherbets, and I sat in bed and watched the end of the women's game. And then as soon as I saw the Civvy Tower, I tapped out. But I did watch it the next day. And yeah, I think it was lots of passion in the game. I thought it was very scrappy. But it was a good win for Australia. They showed their class. Tedesco was outstanding. I thought Australians forward pack really stood up. They were good against a very tough and physical Samoan side. And yeah, look, it's a really good win for Australia, but also a strong showing for Samoa as well.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to see, there's already been talk of some Samoans pledging to play for Samoa now through all the internationals and not
Did
playing
Samoa
for Australia.
not come up on your DNA test, Taylor?
No, unfortunately, which sucks because if Samoa won, I would have thrown out a few cheers and, 685 to the world, all that sort of stuff. But look, I think it's great that there's chat already. Blokes like Paulo and Jerome Luai and things like that, and Brian To'o have all pledged to continue to play for Samoa, which is, I think,
wouldn't you, based on what's happened?
Phil said during that he looks at the Hunters and how good they've gone and how good they've continued to thrive since the inception of the Hunters, the Papua New Guinea national team, sorry. I think the reason why they had their best showing and Samoa had their best showing at this World Cup is because the Tongan players have carved the way in saying you don't have to go play for New Zealand. You don't have to go play for Australia. You can be competitive and truly support your heritage and truly play for what you really want to in your heart. And it's turned a massive shift in international football. And I can't wait to continue seeing this thrive. I can't wait for the Cook. I think the Cook Islands is next. If they can have their players commit to the Cook Islands, you never know how big they could get. I just can't wait to see this continue. But yeah, it's a really good, I guess, Southern Hemisphere football. More in particular, it's great to see these players pledge those allegiances, push money to one side, and do things for their family and their culture. And what a great display!
Fiji weren't in it, Raneel.
Yeah.
But did you stay up to watch it?
What, the final? Yeah, I actually did watch it.
Live?
Yeah, obviously, yes, I did.
Wow.
There were snippets where I was falling asleep, but not because of the game, just because it was a bit
the time,
late.
the hour. It would have been a 3 o'clock kickoff in the morning for you, wouldn't it?
Exactly. But I think a huge credit should go to the star Samoan players who, prior to the tournament, obviously they would have not known they were going to a finals, and made that plunge to play for Samoa.
Yeah.
And, I think the credit 100% has to go to them. And look what they've done. Look what they've done for the future of Samoan junior players. Who don't just have to aspire to play for, as Taylor said, like a Kangaroos or a Kiwi nation.
No, great point, mate. Now, look, I think we've, killed the World Cup topic for the last 50 minutes, so might talk about a couple of other things before we close up shop. But we've rattled through things quite quickly, to be honest, so we've got a bit of time to talk about other things. Brisbane Rugby League. I've had clubs contact me, and they're not happy. In Brisbane, there's only 14 games been announced for juniors this year. Competition starting seemingly earlier and finishing at the end of July. Taylor, you're a parent in Brisbane, sorry. You've been around the game, so you know what a rugby league season normally is in this country. What do you feel about that stuff that I've just told you?
Well, first of all, I'm relieved because you said I'm a parent in Sydney, and I was about to say where.
Well, it came up on your DNA test.
Did you know this? My wife watches this, so let's be careful.
Yeah.
No, look, to be honest, as a parent, you want the kids to be playing as much as possible. Not necessarily for the money, but because, it is expensive to get your kids in a rugby league. It's not necessarily that makes you want it to happen. It's more I just remember being that young and playing football all year, starting in February, finishing in September with grand finals, and playing grand finals in 6s and 7s. Now, we've stopped that. We've stopped tackle at a young age. This will be my son's first year of tackling. I would like to see you get your 20. I mean, 20s that's your standard, isn't it? 20 competition games would have to be your standard of rugby league. I don't see how you can go sub 15. I don't think that's right. I don't think there's enough there for the kids. You're not satisfying them for long enough. They want more. They're getting to 14 games in, and what they want more football, and you're taking it away from them. I think it's tough.
Why are they doing it?
I don't know why they're doing it. It seems like I remember being a kid and watching rugby league get in this almighty clash with cricket towards the end of the year. This almighty, your cricket coach would be saying, well, we train on Tuesday, so you can let them know at football that you'll be coming here. And, and then you'd go to football training and they'd be like, well, where were you? It's almost like they've just sort of slowly exited the conversation there and just let the summer sports. I don't know if that's a factor.
Has your rego gone down?
I don't know. I haven't checked my rego for this year. No,
there's clearly less games.
And to be honest, I didn't take too much notice of it last year because I'm such a footy nut and I love football. I just, it could have been $2,000 and I might have raised an eyebrow, but I probably still would have paid it because I want my son to play football.
Well, at the end of the day, what about the cash we're getting off this podcast, mate? I mean, you've got to spend it somewhere. So
yeah, well, unfortunately, that's going to have to go down now because the Phil Caplan appearance fee was through the roof, and that's why it was only half an hour. People, let me tell you. But yeah, now, look,
you know why Brisbane Rugby League knew that there might be a little bit of blowback from this. they turned comments off on Facebook. Because last year there was fans and parents complaining that because of the washout, there was no remade games in the draw. And
how soft are we as humans these days? How soft are we?
it's different, isn't it?
Turning the comments off. Like, how do you get feedback?
Well,
you know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
you should listen.
yes.
You should listen to your customers, mate. Hold that thought, because one of my topics I want to talk about. Have you seen the outbreaks of trolls and hate speech on the Rugby League Coach Facebook page in the last 10 days?
I haven't, but I really want a new Rugby League Coach segment to be Lee Addison reading comments about people spraying
Yes.
Lee Addison.
I've got to be honest. So I don't mind people criticizing me or whatever. That doesn't bother me. But a few weeks ago, I used to occasionally read out a comment, didn't I?
Yeah.
If I did that this last 10 days, I'd probably need 3 hours. Like, it's what's going on in the world, James?
I don't know. Just so it's all these, well, they call them keyboard warriors, don't they? Put the thing down, comments down on Facebook, and then just hide behind the keyboard, so to speak. But they just don't know how to conduct an argument.
What's upsetting me is that a lot of my followers are getting upset reading the comments because they want to have good discourse. A lot of my followers on Facebook like to chat about the game.
Yeah.
And that's why I do what I do. I'm a rugby league coach and I've got a business, but I love the game and I like chatting about the game and I like creating chat about the game. I mean, we have the Rugby League Coach podcast, and the one thing we probably don't talk about is coaching sometimes.
Yeah.
But they've been getting upset reading some of the comments.
Yeah.
It's
so it's sad. It's just sad that people can't conduct themselves better, really. I mean, I've got to answer. I'm going to answer a criticism somebody made of me, but I'm just trying to back it up about Jake Tebojevic.
What was it?
Well, they said that really Jake Tebojevic isn't really. He's looking at being the Australian team, but look at his work rate. Look at his and through the stuff I've learned from you about shoulder contact, work rate, finding the floor on your front. What's Jake Tebojevic, and he does it. He's so efficient, such an efficient player, such an efficient tackler. And I
think Jake Tebojevic is getting most Australian sides.
James, don't. If someone tells you Jake Tebojevic shouldn't be in the Australian side, don't talk with them. They're clearly in the nut house.
Oh, I've not answered it anyway, Taylor. I've not answered it anyway, but isn't he an efficient player? His techniques, his work rate.
I tell you what, I reckon if you walked around the Australian sheds and said who's the favourite person to play with, I reckon 99% of them would say Jake Tebojevic. Because he always turns up. He's always there. He's sort of the epitome of just the tough footballer, even in the fact that in today's day and age, he still has a terrible looking body. Like, he doesn't have the muscles on muscles, the abs, everything that all the players have these days because they train so much. He just rocks up, no nonsense, just does his job, does the business, and mate, he's the best. He's the best at it in the world. He was one of the best locks in the world, and then locks moved, and Isaiah Yeo became that. Now he's one of the best front rowers in the world. He's a footballer.
You've just taken the name Isaiah Yeo. What a work rate he has as well. What an involvement he has. Superb.
His hands are just spectacular, James. His hands are just spectacular.
Well. He's tackling. Yeah.
Watching him in that World Cup final, in that extra link role, I guess traditionally with Penrith, because they're a bigger pack, they play closer football. So even when he does ball play, the balls out the back to Cleary or Luai aren't long-winded passes. But the one specific backline movement, I think it was in the first half, they were pushing from the right hand to the left-hand side, and got the ball off Cleary and then linked between Cleary and Munster. And the ball he threw was about a 20-metre out the back pass spiral. It just hit Munster perfectly on the chest. And I was like, big pressure moment, World Cup, and he's just so experienced and he's so skillful and talented.
He really is multi-skilled, really.
One of the posts that has created a lot of angst. So I'm going to read 3 posts here that's created some of the vitriol. A picture of Nathan Cleary with a World Cup. This lad has answered a few critics. He's almost won it all team-wise already, and he's 25 years old. World Club Challenge comes in February. Last night, he became a world champion to add to the list. 8,300 people have reacted to it, 104 shares, and comments. I don't know if they give you the number anymore. Here's one comment, right, that's not abusive or anything, but this just shows you how people think. Who is he? Oh, it is Nathan. Saw him in the World Cup. I didn't watch him for long. Saw him miss one from the sideline. He could not kick it far enough.
I love that. I love that. They've had an out loud conversation and then felt the need to write that down exactly how they thought it in their heads. Who's that? Oh, it's Nathan. Like,
not him only. Not him only. He went missing in the World Cup. His teams he was fortunate to play with helped win them for him. Team sport.
Yeah, well,
yeah. Yes. So that they're the mildest things that are a thing. So I've got no problem with those two things that I've just read out, by the way. But I'm just giving you some of the picture of
the level of comment.
no, just and I'm not criticising that kind of comment either. I'm talking that it's not like people going, yeah, well done, Nathan, or great post, or whatever. There's plenty of that, but there's also people just saying things like he's not that good because. Or today I did a post about the salary cap saying I'm not a fan of it because of something that was in the Daily Telegraph, and somebody. Well, it's generating a lot of talk now. I did one on Ben Hunt. People are accusing me of not having eyes and things like that. Like it's. Let me scroll to what I wrote about Ben Hunt. It's quite a few posts away, but I mean, a lot of it is funny, but he's just.
I think that it's been proven that places like Russia, Korea, China, they have these big, massive troll farms where they make profiles up and they literally go out there to start fights on the internet.
Yeah.
Because, that's the more traffic they get, the more bites they get. I think because that harshness is out there, people just mimic that harshness as well. It becomes who can say the funniest thing that's aggressive towards another person. It's just not real. It's not. No one would say any of that to anyone in real life.
So the post pertaining to Ben Hunt. I mean, this is a grenade I let off 4 days ago, and I'm still getting comments on it today. This man had a brilliant World Cup and is getting better every year as a player. Much respect. What do you reckon?
I'd love to hear what the comment is.
Go, have a look in your own time. But it's still going on now. It's not stopped. And it's good. I mean, don't get me wrong, 7,800 responses, 512 comments. Just, really? A lot of it's because he's a Queenslander or a New South Welshman or,
Yeah.
So Nathan Cleary did that one. I dared say that Cooper Cronk was underrated. I've put the most underrated half to ever play the game because he's never entered the immortal conversation. To me, my first signing of the last 20 years, first name on the team sheet. What a serial winner, what a game manager, what a brain, what a consistent performer. Same most weeks. Put it this way, there'd be no conjecture about the Aussie half, should he be around now. Was good enough to keep Thurston in the 6 jersey, the best. 5,200 responses, 1,200 comments. I got to the point where I refused to reply to about the 50th person who asked me, why is he underrated? Like, I mean, any of those posts, the 3 posts I just read out to you, would they get you fired up that you'd need to abuse someone? I mean, I've seen borderline racist stuff on some of these comments.
Yeah, it's crazy that people feel so passionately about it, but they're the type of people out there watching the game. Very unfortunate that they have those views.
I guess I don't even mind them having those views, but you say keep them in your own house, don't you?
Yeah. You show yourself up at the end of the day. I mean, you don't have to see these people face to face, but you get these up, and when you bring racism or just having a go at people and abuse, it's just shows somebody up for what they are. Really, it's poor, poor conduct.
And there's definitely a correlation between the time of night and the things that are happening too. You can tell some people have been on the Forex and.
Well, I've always had a rule. I never put anything on Facebook that's anywhere near controversial when I've had a drink. I never do. Yeah. Never do. Yeah. I don't put controversial stuff on anyway, but I have that rule.
So I guess I brought this up, not because...
Well, the internet's forever.
Not because I'm upset for my followers who are getting upset about it. I guess I just don't want kids to see some of the things that people are writing. It's...
I guess you could moderate your posts at some level.
You can. I'm a bit loath to do it at the minute because Facebook sometimes gets that wrong too. So it already says it's hidden posts that could be offensive.
Yeah.
And then I press unhide and they've said twinkle, twinkle, little star in it. So that's the problem with the algorithm sometimes.
Yes.
So that's a step I'm loath to take. I'm going to monitor it for a bit, and I might get to the point where some posts I'll turn comments off.
Yeah, you have to. I guess if you get to that point, it gets a bit hectic.
Yeah, I mean it's a real problem. I mean, Aaron Molan was targeted once a couple of years ago, and there's actually a law changed as a result of it about hate speech. So, I guess what I want to say on this podcast is, if you're coming on my Facebook page, keep it clean, don't abuse anyone, and a lot of the community that are around the Rugby League Coach Facebook page, they are writing to me privately, and they are looking out for you, and we're gonna get rid of you. So, if you do happen to be listening to this podcast, then please show some respect to all the people that use it for the right purposes. Mate, I'm sending out an ebook.
An ebook? What on? Talk to me.
Coaching and playing stuff. About 20 odd pages. Yeah, I'm giving it as a free gift for everyone for Christmas. So I just need their email address. Email addresses. Yeah.
Right.
I'll tell you right now what it's going to include.
Talk to me.
I will in a minute when I find it. Give me a sec.
I bet you my wife gets that for me for Christmas now. She'll find out it's free.
I was just on my personal Instagram by accident then, and so I was thinking, no, that's not right. It's coming out in early December. Free coaching ebook for everyone on the mailing list. Top tips for coaches, clubs and players. It will be jam-packed with many of the tips and tricks that have helped me. And then I'll go on a bit about what I've done in the game. In the ebook, I'll be giving you these key secrets that were the bedrock of the above, and I'm giving it you to you for Christmas for free. It will include things about developing players. It will include things about coaching. So, how to teach skills, planning template tips, running great programs, positional and unit specific breakdown and positional specific extras. And I've basically written it. I'm just in the process of making it look prettier now. It's about 20 odd pages.
Yeah, nice. How good's that? Bit of an experience writing one of them.
And I'm asking people to send me questions, and I'll do a question and answer in it too. So DM me or email admin@rugbyleaguecoach.com.au. Admin@rugbyleaguecoach.com.au. I might tell the story of when I was driving down the road in Sydney and Raneel got pulled over by the popo. I might tell the story about Taylor Brown, who, when he didn't get picked for my school team, started carrying on like a pork chop. I may tell the story about James Varley, who has got so much dirt on him, I can't say it on a family show.
Well, I'm not going to lie. I knew Phil had a little bit. He didn't have much time, but seeing James here today not working, I know he said he had a day off, but I can't help but think maybe the bus company's seen the podcast, concerned about what's
And
what
they gave him his tickets, please.
what sort of extracurricular activities he's doing while on the on the bus. He's on podcasts, and I was concerned. There was
On work time.
We were worried from it. Yeah.
There was talk about buses being late on the podcast. That was a concern.
So, boys, we're going to keep the podcast going, and I guess what I want you all to think about, all three of you today, because Tim didn't make it, different topics we're going to talk about, because rugby league news does die off. The journos go on holidays and things like that, but we're going to keep the ship going. I said ship, not anything that comes out of the bum hole. So topics I've thought of are things like we could talk about halfbacks, which one, basically some of the comments I see on Facebook, but Raneel is better than Cronk or whatever.
That's right.
Yeah.
Jeez, put that on Facebook. I wonder what sort of reception Raneel would get.
So think about topics. I reckon over the summer, the Australian summer, the English winter, let's really talk about what the guys are talking about in the pub, and let's fill that gap for them. Boys, it's been a wonderful podcast, probably because we didn't talk as much in this one.
Phil, sorted this out.
No, it was good, wasn't it?
It's great to have Phil. And as I said, when you get someone like that, you wind him up, you watch him go. How good.
Brilliant. James, take care. Get your winter woolies on. Raneel.
Yeah. It's getting a bit colder.
Raneel, you're an hour ahead of us, so you will be ready for bed. Have a good one. And Taylor, make sure you enjoy sailing on that river behind you. For those who are watching on Facebook, you know what I'm talking about. My name's Lee Addison. You've been watching or listening to the episode 25 of the award-winning Rugby League Coach podcast. Ta-ra!
Ta-ra.
Wow.